Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sit and See. I'm Dr. Jared Jones. My research specialties are ancient systems of meditation, the cognitive science of meditation, Buddhist philosophy, and the philosophy of science. How was that? I've been a Buddhist for about 20 years, also training in Dragon Gate Taoism for another six. And part of my research as a philosopher and student of religion, not as a scientist, of course, um, was into the cognitive science of meditation. So very much interested both in the traditional approach to all of this stuff and in the modern approach to it and the overlap between the two. I'm on a bit of a mission, such as it is, to try to help people living in the real world understand how to train in meditation as people living in the real world instead of as people living in isolation training in meditation. And the two have some similarities, they have some differences. Throughout the course of my life, I've done my best to seek out teachers and practitioners who are quite successful in their practice, not just according to them, but according to the lineages they're a part of, to teach me how it is that they, as people living mostly most of the time in the real world, have become accomplished practitioners. And so, as best I can, to the best of my ability, I'm trying to communicate these things to anyone who would care to listen. And Sit and See, which should be on the screen, ta-da, is a relatively secular approach to meditation, although I think that if you train in meditation and you do it properly and you have the right tools, very quickly you're going to be having experiences within a matter of months that you will find to be rather unusual. If you don't know what you're doing and you're doing the normal sort of mindfulness thing where you don't put in very much force and all of this, maybe not. But if you're doing practice quite seriously and you know what to do, things start to happen, and pretty quickly those things will seem religious. Right. So, Oates, hello. David Barnes, hello. Good to see you both. Right. So that's why I'm here. And it's been a lovely day. Sorry if I'm a little bit late, everyone. Had a lovely chat with there's a growing Sikh community that I'm working with, and every week it started with one gentleman, and we did a little practice together, and then it was two, then it was three, and now I think it's like seven for next week. It's really fascinating, and as I've told you before, there's a Sikh gentleman who lives brahmacharya, who lives as a celibate, and he's going to come on the podcast. He might be the next guest, or Lama Karma, as a gentleman, a Western gentleman, Lama Karma, who's did 6 years of solitary retreat, 2 3 year periods under one of his gurus, who's now a layperson married with a daughter, who's also going to be coming on the podcast at some point in the near future. So really interesting stuff coming. But I had a lovely chat and bit of practice with the Sikh community. Man, that community turns out awesome human beings. It really does. Really does. Oh, okay. So also, I don't know if he's here yet. Maybe he is in the background. I was chatting with one of the regulars who's been around for a bit, who's getting a medical degree in Poland, and it might work out. We'll see. It might work out that I can do an in-person retreat in October in Poland. So anybody who's in the neighborhood would be welcome to come. I'd put a donation amount up there of some kind, but I would, of course, much prefer if it comes down to can you donate or can you not come at all or whatever, just show up, do some practice. So, with a little bit of luck, there'll be enough sponsorship to be able to put on the event. It would be probably 3 days or 3.5 days of some teaching and some practice, and then just hanging out in Poland for a day or two. Uh, big city, big city. What is the name? Hold on, I was just looking at it. Ah, yes. What is the city? Earth? Can you put it in the chat? Yes, yes, Krakow. There it is. Yeah, so the idea would be, if it works out, if there's enough sort of sponsors and donators and whatever, um, it would be, I'd probably be there 5 days. There'd probably be 3 or 3.5 days of teaching, and yeah, we would do some practice, and there'd be time to just hang out and talk over coffee, and yeah, that'd be it. For people that are interested in the martial arts stuff, we'd have a chance to fool around a bit too. Some of the weird martial arts skills that I talk about, I could show you a few of those if you were interested. They're good fun. Okay. Yeah, so that was the day. For those of you who are new in the sit and see class, what we do is hang out, talk for a bit, answer questions until about 9 o'clock or 9:15, and then we do some practice, and then we call it a day. And if things sort of drag on a bit and questions are there, sometimes I hang out and do open questions after. But uh, tonight I'm probably going to go so that I'm going to be working on some new content. I think I want to finish the series related to infinite causal sequences. This is an important one for Buddhist folks. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Um, but I think to be fulfilled as a sort of intellectually fulfilled, let's say, as a Buddhist, you need to be fairly confident about infinite causal sequences and why those do make sense. And if you can sort that out, and you can rebuff most of the objections that come up, then you can feel pretty comfortable about this worldview that seems quite strange, I think, when you first hear about it. Okay. Hello, Sasa. Hello, 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 Manam. Oh, also, I'm sure you all saw the video, but if you didn't see it and you're stumbling upon this later, I put up a big thank you video thanking every donor's name who didn't want to be anonymous, and every donor I could find. And then, of course, so many of you, so many of you have done other things, contributing to the community, contributing your time, contributing some research in whatever area or whatever. So this is only happening and only possible because of all of you. So thank you, everyone who's put in time, and from my heart, more than the money, more than the time, more than all of this, those of you who have put in some practice really makes me happy. You know, that's the essence of all of this. That's the essence of all of this. If you do your practice, you do your practice well. Even if you come to me at some point and you say it's everything is worse, you know, and I go, okay, you've been doing your practice and you've noticed everything is worse than you thought. This is good. you know, sometimes I think sometimes people come to their teachers and they only want to tell them the good stuff that's happening. They don't tell them that, oh, I'm failing at this, or this didn't go right, or this weird thing keeps happening that I don't like. And very often those things are the sign that something good is happening, as strange as that sounds. Let me give you one example that's kind of counterintuitive. Um, when you first start training in meditation, a lot of people quit because if you start to gain a little bit of experience making the mind more concentrated, you notice that your emotions are worse than you thought, your thoughts are worse than you thought, your distractions worse than you thought. Your mind runs around way more than you thought it does, and is way more out of control than you thought it was. And especially if you're a capable person, you've done other things that are hard. You've opened a business, you've gotten a degree, you've done this, you've done that, right? that are not simple things, not easy things. Maybe you're even managing your life quite well in general. There's not very much conflict and like you're fairly competent socially. Maybe you've raised a bunch of money for something. Maybe you've done whatever. And you sit down to do something really stupid, like try to keep your mind on your breath, and you find out your mind is an absolute mess. And it's a huge surprise and disappointment to people, especially if you're a fairly capable person, that you can't do this stupid thing, like keep your mind on your breath for 5 minutes. Seems like the silliest, most simple thing in the world until someone explains to you what it would really mean to keep your breath on the mind or the mind on the breath for 5 minutes, and you realize you're absolutely terrible at this. And the better you get at seeing how terrible you are at it, the more you can fight the problem and actually make progress against the problem, right? So one of the signs that you're making progress in the beginning of meditation, ironically, is that you see your mind is worse than you thought it was. And this makes a lot of people quit if they don't have teachers for obvious reasons. How many people have you heard online here and there, your friend groups, whatever, they go, "Oh yeah, I tried meditation for a while. I really suck at meditation. I can't make my mind focus. I sit down and my mind's totally crazy." And it's because somebody told them meditation is relaxing. Meditation is calming your mind. Meditation is this and this and this. Meditation is in the beginning of the process is seeing how screwed up your mind has been your whole life, no matter how capable you think you are. And some of you are quite capable people. I've talked to some of you, and you're very capable, very competent, very socially capable, et cetera, very well put together in other areas. But you try to put the mind on the breath, and it's pretty obvious that your mind isn't what you thought it was. And that can be frustrating, you know? So this is why it's important to have teachers, have people further down the path. This is one of the benefits of lineage, that they have teachings that tell you, oh, these are the signs. These are the signs that are a good indicator, and some of them are totally counterintuitive. So when people come to me and they it's even when they tell me bad things, I go, "Oh, okay, that sounds like you're at this part now because that's the next problem." Another thing people come to me and say, there's a wonderful thing from the Sikh community. Part of their practices sometimes is doing 2 or 3 hours of mantra recitation as part of their daily practice for people that are quite serious. And they're doing mental recitation, reciting it inside the mind. And one of these, again, one of these Sikh gentlemen is excellent character, this young gentleman. And he comes to me and he says, "Yeah, I noticed that my mind is getting more hazy, that when I'm talking to people, it's like it's hard to keep track of what they're saying, and my mind is and my mind is sort of more foggy and hazy, and it's doing less of what I want, and sometimes I'm falling asleep on my cushion." I went, "Fantastic. Why? Why is that a good thing? Because that's the problem that comes up if you're getting some concentration in the beginning. So now all you need to do is fix that problem and you'll be at the next stage of training and concentration. Fantastic. Fantastic. You've put in enough work to have that problem instead of the previous problem. See what I mean? And at some point, you will have dealt with the problems and you'll have a really excellent state of concentration. Great. Fantastic. So I can't tell, David, I can't tell if you mean that your thoughts are so big they feel like a big dump truck of thoughts, or if your thoughts themselves are like a dump, or both. I can't tell what you mean. Okay. Well, do we have some questions before we get going? Maybe I'll start our practice on time today for once. Okay. Seems as though, oh, I can see. When I pull the stream up over here, I can see how far behind it is. And it's way behind. All right. So let's do this. Let's jump into some practice. Ah, so the practice of seeing everyone as a Buddha is usually a tantric practice. Uh, it's quite difficult. Yeah, everyone has Buddha nature, but it depends on the school you ask, as to every sort of how far you want to take that idea of Buddha nature, and the schools have some debate about it. The school that I'm in, and I think the argument's pretty good that what we are right now isn't isn't a Buddha because there are problems we need to fix and there are qualities we need to gain. But it's the same. There are fundamental qualities that we have now of our consciousness that allow us to become Buddhas. And every being that has a mind is like this. And so there is the potential, since your mind, for example, isn't inherently a human mind, or to borrow the Zen one is, does a dog have Buddha nature? Right? And of course the answer to the koan is mu. But if we give a little bit more straightforward answer rather than it's empty of inherent existence. If we give a little bit more straightforward answer, the it's that your mind has the potential to become all sorts of things. It could that mind Your mind could generate in the next life as the mind of a dog, or the mind of a human being, or the mind of a hungry ghost, or the mind of a heavenly being. Your mind also has the potential, a nature which can be generated into the mind of a Buddha. That's not excluded from the realm of possibility if you cultivate all the right good qualities and you remove all the right kinds of things that get in the way of that happening. I think that's a better way to think about it from a sort of practice standpoint for the most part. And then, at some point if you're doing tantric stuff and they say it's better to see all beings as Buddhas for this purpose of this practice, then do that. But, you know, the rest of the time, I think it is quite helpful to just think. I mean, during the big retreat I did a little while ago with everyone, the 5 day retreat. We went through all the 5 foundations, and when we got to the second part of Foundation 4, and we were meditating on consciousness, I at that time I pointed out, for example, that when you look at consciousness, consciousness is already pure. It doesn't have within it all of the ordinary turmoil and so forth that you see on the surface. And again, this is not fully what they're talking about when they talk about your consciousness being pure, but even at the level of just seeing the conventional foundational qualities of your mind, like the fact that it's like space and it knows things, already it doesn't have the negative qualities and disturbance that you associate with your ordinary mind. Already those aren't there. And so it becomes, I think, much more experiential, the idea that, well, maybe my mind is capable of being like that all the time. And if my mind is formless, maybe it's possible that my mind can extend out to other things and know things that are way beyond what my body can experience through my normal 6 senses. Or sorry, through my normal 5 external senses. So having those experiences in meditation, even as a secular person, probably, if you could generate those experiences, I think gives you some experiential reason to think, oh, well, if my mind is like this, if this is what it's like, then maybe its limits are different than I thought they were, you know? So this is how I approach it from a practice standpoint. And then if you're inclined in a Buddhist sort of way, then you can start thinking, okay, well, I looked at my mind and it's like this. What about the mind of that worm over there? Isn't the worm's mind like this also? Of course, it's arranged much differently than mine. Its senses are different than mine. Its conceptual capabilities are way different than mine. But fundamentally, isn't it like that also? And the flea and the this and that. All these other creatures, aren't their minds also like this? Yeah, yeah, because that's what minds are like. So then this can be used as a reason by the time you get to rumination meditation and you're trying to work on loving kindness, compassion, other things like this. That experience can be used as a reason to support these other types of insights you're trying to gain and character traits you're trying to gain as a practitioner. So, again, I'm not a genius or anything, but part of the reason that I put the practices in the order that I did in the five foundations is because if you have that experience before you're doing a lot of metta practice, you can draw on that experience to make your metta really powerful. And you can also draw on non-dual experiences you had with your five external senses to make your metta more powerful because you see that the normal self you thought was in between or separate from experience, that it's definitely that kind of self isn't there. Still seems like you're here, but the type of self you have to deal with is much more subtle than the one you think you need to deal with in the beginning. I know that's way too vague, but the sort of, again, I consider non duality to be the very beginning of real stuff in meditation. It's like nowhere near the end. So there's a lot of people that talk about non duality and teach non duality as if it is the thing, and it's not the thing. It's it's something that you need to be able to do as casually as taking your next in breath so that you can do the other things that are really important in your practice. it's it just has to do with concentration. Non-duality happens when there's concentration on something that's strong enough. So it's just a skill that you need to gain. It's I hate to make it sound sort of I hate to make it sound sort of less important than it is in a sense, but it is actually important that you, when those experiences happen, you put them in the right context because they will seem extremely special. One of my students, for example, a little while back, he was doing the first foundation, intensive breath. Good morning, Hans. Thank you again, Hans. Thank you, thank you. Dada Daddy always cracks me up a little bit when I see your name. Good to see you here. Greetings, greetings. So one of my students was doing the first foundation intensive breath, and he said that it felt like his mind moved out of his head, which is where he feels like it normally lives, and moved forward in space and was basically not attached to his body in the way he thought it was and was out here somewhere. And I went, yeah, of course. Because if you gain a non-dual awareness of this patch of skin, the center of where your awareness is has to move to here. If the center of your awareness is here, then the object is over here, the mind is over here. It's two things. If the center of your awareness moves here, it's not two things. Right? Non-dual, not two. So this should be a normal everyday occurrence that is just something that you can do when you want to and when it's relevant. So I don't see it as that profound of a capability, even though from an experiential point of view, when it happens the first few times and you start moving your mind around or your mind, like a bunch of stuff that you thought was you just disappears and you're left with raw perception of stuff, you go, this is so different than I thought. It will totally blow your mind. But it's the beginning. That's the beginning. It's incredible, you know? Okay. Oh, oh, it's exciting. It's exciting to potentially do this thing in Poland for those who'd like to come. I would imagine I'll bring much of my gear that's here now. I'll bring it if we can get the money together and we can do it. I'll bring it, and people that want to do it online as we're doing it there live and at the medical uni in Poland that this could be you could join in. What's really interesting about retreat is that yeah, all new experiences are. I mean, again, lots of interesting things are going to happen in the beginning, and then you get used to them, and then that's just how it is. It's not like some mind blowing thing. That's just you should be able to generate a non dual experience of something as easy as raising your arm into the air, just like this. You're looking at the cup, and then you go, it looks like the cup is independent of my consciousness. Oh yeah, I'm looking at it now and it's not independent. Okay, good. That's what I thought. Right? Like it's just a normal thing you do. When you catch yourself interacting with things in the wrong way, you go, "Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I see it now. It's like that. No problem." Okay. That probably sounds a little too out there. All right. So, in terms of a little bit of retreat, what's really fantastic about having a few days to do retreat is when we do these sessions, for example, we're contending with a whole day of stuff where we're probably not doing that much practice. We're contending with a whole day of stirring up our mind in a way for most of us that isn't practice. And so by the time we get to doing the practice, we're dealing with a whole day's worth of not working with our mind in the right way, and therefore the level of results we can get are less. But if you're doing even 5 hours of practice a day or 6 hours, now there's a lot less stirring up of your mind, and so there's a lot more that can begin happening. And even if you're not that capable when you get started, if you're doing 3 or 4 days, that can be a really transformative experience because it'll give you a taste of capabilities that you might have much further down the road. A lot of those will go away after retreat, but at least you got to taste them and you know that they're real and you know that those are possibilities in terms of your training. So retreat's very, very important in this way. You get to sort of climb higher and look over the some one of my teachers said, you're like you climb up and you know when you're climbing a hill or something and you get to the top and you look over and you can see there's a huge view over there. It's sort of like that. Retreat can be like that. Okay, so yeah, the other aspect is that in order to really teach these things properly, either you need to be studying them fairly well, doing them a lot, and asking questions and going back and forth with somebody that knows what they are, or you just need to be in an environment where you're doing a lot of them and you're getting the instructions over and over again, and questions come up because you're doing the practice 20 times a day or 10 times a day or whatever. And then therefore you actually make progress. And then within a couple of days, you can be taught other things, and those practices go much deeper because you have the previous capability already. So, again, quite excited to potentially be doing this if we can get the money together in Poland. Uh, Anybody that would like to contribute to that, maybe I don't know exactly how we're going to get the money sort of arranged in one pot, but I'll put something like that together very soon. Uh, I mean, I'm happy to go anywhere and do retreat, as long as there's enough sponsorship and there's enough people there to do it and all that. But I like to do a lot of retreat, um, a lot of little retreats and things from home, so that you can do your practice where you are, and then there's no transition. Basically, you do your practices where you are. You encounter all the problems you're normally going to encounter, but you're doing way more practice and working at it much more with much more heart and much more demand. And then when you get out of retreat, you go back to doing this amount, but you've now you have this level of capability somewhere in here instead of down here. And you did it where you are. So you already know how to maintain it in the real world. So I like doing retreats remotely for that reason. First of all, nobody spends like 3 grand flying somewhere or whatever. But secondly, you have all of this benefit from the struggle of trying to do it where you actually are. That's really important. Now, of course, if you can't do it where you are because you don't have the capability yet, or you haven't done other retreats or whatever, that's one thing. Uh, but anyways, yeah, I mean, I have other students in the U.S. that would probably want to come and do something if I put it on. So it's just a matter of talking to people and getting it arranged, really. All right, let's do some practice. So I think all of you have done intensive breath. So let's do intensive breath meditation. For those of you who might be new, this is a pranayama style meditation, a breath style meditation. The technique is very short, very high intensity. The reason being, if you're in retreat, you can let your mind settle down for several days and you can use very gentle intent until the mind just happens to settle down because you haven't been stirring it up for several days. In real life, you're dealing with all of the distractions of real life coming at you with no time to settle your mind down. So you need to meet it with great force and settle the mind down by force. And then when the mind is settled, you can use it to do other types of practice that require less forceful intention to make the mind even more calm. So I think today we'll do a seated practice of intensive breath, and then we'll do a seated practice of body scanning. It'll just be sort of a day focused on making the mind very, very calm. Okay, so breathe in and out through the nose. Find a patch of skin in the nose, near the nostril, that where you feel the most sensations of breathing. So when I say begin, I want you to place your mind on that patch of skin with as much force, as much intensity as you can. And try to pull all of the awareness as best you can, every bit of awareness away from your eyes, away from your ears, away from the smell faculty, away from your tongue, and away from the rest of your body. And of course, away from your concepts, 100% of your being as best as you can, right here, bang, on the sensations of breathing. And the only other thing you're going to do is count the breath from 1 to 7, 7 to 0. So the full activity is breathing and counting. Okay, so here we go. 3, 2, 1, begin. Okay, place your mind now in your left foot. And when I say place your mind in your left foot, I mean with the same quality you placed it on the breath. You're not imagining the sensations, you're not trying to figure them out, you're not visualizing your foot, you're not imagining your foot. You're just feeling the actual physical, tactile sensations that you feel in the foot. In the left ankle, left calf, knee, lower thigh, upper thigh, and into the hip joint, the right foot, ankle, calf, into the knee, lower thigh, upper thigh, and into the right hip joint. Front of your pelvis, back of your pelvis, your tailbone, and with the tailbone, just gently squeeze your awareness to try to get all of it into the tailbone. And then move forward to the anus, perineum, and then your sexual organs. When you finish scanning the sexual organs, come to rest at the tip if you're male, or the most sensitive point if you're a female. Now move your awareness backwards until you arrive back at the tailbone. Move it up until you arrive at the waist. So the waist is going to be 3 or 4 inches above your, starting from the hip bones in the back is an easy way to get your mind to the waist. Just above the hip bones, 3 or 4 inches, that 3 or 4 inches of tissue, if you draw a circle around the body that's 3 or 4 inches wide, that's your waist. So placing the mind in the waist belt. Now, the next 3 to 5 inches, depending upon how big you are, from the top of the waist in the front to the solar plexus is an easy way to get your mind around it. That's the diaphragm belt, the area where your diaphragm is living and moving. So place your mind in the entire ring of tissue that goes around the body in the diaphragm belt. Now, if you had no arms and you had no collarbones and you had no scapula, no shoulder blades, all that would be left is your head and your upper chest. So, starting from the solar plexus up to the bottom of the neck, this is what I call your chest belt, the major cavity containing your lungs and your heart. So try to get your mind into that entire, once again, sort of ring of tissue that excludes your arms, but is the entire upper part of your chest. Now into the top of the left shoulder, front, including the collarbone, the left side, the back, armpit, and the bicep region, as I call it, is everything below the shoulder and leading to the elbow. So that whole ring of tissue, once again. And then the elbow joint, forearm, wrist, and the palm and the back of the hand. And then, as best you can, the thumb is the only one that's a little bit weird because we tend to think of the second joint of the thumb as the first joint. But the first joint of the thumb is almost at the base of the hand. So place your mind in the first joint of all of your fingers, including the thumb, and then the second joint of all your fingers, including the thumb, and then the third joint of all of your fingers, including the thumb, and then the tips of all of your fingers, including the thumb. Okay, move to the top of the right shoulder, the front, including the collarbone, the outside, and the back of the shoulder, including the scapula, the armpit, into the bicep region, elbow, forearm, wrist, palm and the back of your hand. The first joint, second joint, third joint, fingertips, now into the bottom third of your neck, the middle third, and the upper third. Now place your mind into the joint between the neck and the skull. The back of your scalp, left side, right side, your right ear, left ear, and your forehead. Left eyebrow and left eye, right eyebrow and right eye, your nose, your left cheek and left temple, your right cheek and right temple, the upper lip area, lower lip area and chin, your top lip, bottom lip, the skin inside your mouth, your teeth, the roof of your mouth, underneath your tongue and your tongue. Take your awareness and slide it back across your tongue until you find your throat. And then slowly, because this is not easy to do, without jumping, try to go straight up from the throat without the mind jumping up to the top of the head. And now become aware of the top of the scalp. Okay. So little bonus, not easy to do, but if today's session went well, try to place your as much of your awareness as you can on just the contents of your consciousness, just the not what you see, not what you hear, not what you smell, not what you taste, not what the body feels, but solely and exclusively on whatever it is that appears before the in terms of your private world of internal experience, thought, memory, etc., etc. So if it's anything associated with the five external senses, do your best to ignore it and solely focus your mind on the contents of consciousness. And if it appears that there's nothing there, that there's nothing happening in your mind for certain periods of time, don't try to make something happen. Just keep the mind focused inwardly and ready to experience the next bit of mental content that occurs, if that makes sense. So again, not easy, and we're jumping a little bit ahead in the syllabus, but it can be good from time to time to try to jump ahead. So we'll do this for just a few minutes. One way to think about this practice is, since we're now dealing with the mind itself, try to do nothing at all. The only intent that you should have is that if you find your mind doing something deliberately, changing something, altering something, judging something, adding to a thought that has come up, that you're going to stop doing that and return to just observing it like you're watching an internal movie, right? So in Zen, this is called doing non-doing, the intention of no intention. Sometimes I say intentionless, choiceless, decisionless awareness, or awareness that's like a mirror. It's just simply whatever occurs is fine. So do your best. Do your best to pull the mind away from the senses and to simply observe what appears in consciousness. And if nothing appears, just leave the mind in a state of non doing, ready for the next thing to occur. Okay? So give it a try. Okay. Just checking with my teachers because we have a class today, usually. Make sure that I don't miss that if we do have it. Do we have questions? I know that some of you are inclined towards the non-dual, the Zen approach, the Chan approach, the Vietnamese Zen approach, Korean Zen approach, this sort of thing, you know? Or maybe some of you have heard of Mahamudra style practice or Dzogchen style practice, at least the beginning stages of Dzogchen, because Dzogchen is a very deep system. And it's important to see actually that the earlier types of practices that we were doing in my way in the sort of flow chart of teachings that I try to provide don't conflict with those. If you know how to get your mind into a very calm state, and then you want to do just sitting practice, the just sitting practice will work even better if the mind is already highly calm, highly lucid before you attempt to make it simply rest in its nature. If you try to make it rest in its nature without preparing it a bit, then it'll take, maybe you'd sit there 40 minutes before it starts behaving itself. So, uh, the way that you can bring these kinds of practices together, for example, where you have an extremely strong intent to keep the mind on the breath. I was speaking with one of you earlier about how you're starting to get the intent to get something for you out of the way. So if you can get the intent to get something for yourself out of the way, even with the earlier practices, then they can be brought completely in line with a non-doing, non-acting, simply abiding in the nature of consciousness style practice. Even though you're applying technique, you can get the problematic part of the technique out of the way. In the beginning, though, it's quite helpful to have very powerful desire and so forth for that first technique. But in the long run, to bring in the question about philosophy versus experiential non-duality, that sort of thing. Uh, it can really help to have some understanding of the sort of scholarly part, let's say, of what's going on with non-duality. What does it mean? Uh, where are you going with those kinds of practices? Because if you get that wrong, then there's a lot of stuff that's really helpful that you won't do because you think it's not in line with non-dual practice when it is. One of my students does a fair amount of Pure Land practice and also a fair amount of Zen practice. And when I first started teaching him these practices that are at the early part of what I do, he said, I can't figure out how to bring together what is essentially a doing, non-doing, the intention of no intention kind of practice on the Zen side with these practices where you have very strong intent. And it seems like you're trying to get something specific for you. And there's a wonderful analogy from Japanese archery where they say if you're doing Japanese archery as Zen practice and earth, this relates to what we were talking about earlier today, then you're standing there in front of the target and there is basically essentially an absolutely perfect way to pull the arrow and an absolutely perfect way to hold the arrow and an absolutely perfect way to stand and an absolutely perfect way to pull the bow. And then you release. And the rest of it isn't your business. You're not trying to hit a target. You're just applying exactly perfectly appropriate technique at every stage of the process with no desire to get any particular outcome at all. And then you hit a bullseye. but you're not even aiming at the target in an important sense. You're just doing the part you can do absolutely perfectly, and so it hits the target. But you have no concern whatsoever about hitting targets. So, likewise, if you can understand this analogy, then Earth, you can understand a bit of what I mean by what we were talking about before, where you learn how to apply exactly what's appropriate to the circumstance, and then you release the arrow. Or in terms of applying intensive breath practice, body scanning, these other techniques that are leading up to being able to meditate on consciousness, or the external consciousnesses and then consciousness, etc. And you learn how to pull the bow. This is just, you just apply the perfect technique based upon what's actually happening with your mind right now, and you release the arrow of the technique, so to speak. You're not trying to get something for you out of the practice. If you can do that, the practice works even better because that type of intent is more aligned with the results, which is non dual awareness of the breath or non dual awareness of each part of the body. That intent of not trying to get something for you is more aligned with the result, for example, of being able to have non dual awareness of your shoulder. Then I'm me over here. I'm going to get something out of this practice I'm doing in my body over here. Can you see how those a non-dual experience can't be brought together with that kind of mind and intention? Just by nature, those two can't live together. Does that make sense? So, yes, yes, there is class. So that's going to be in about 10 minutes. So I'll have to jump off. But you can see you can see how if you can learn how to be skillful about what your motivation and intention is, even with practices and techniques that seem to be about getting something for me and blah blah blah, you can create even better conditions for making those practices go sort of work better because you're not introducing intentions and motivations that are counter to the experience that you're trying to get into. It was a really lovely chat I had with somebody where they said, I was doing these practices from the Sikh tradition and I started having these experiences that were incredible experiences, you know, like bordering on mythological kinds of incredible experiences. And he said, and then I went and I told some people about it and then it stopped happening. And I went, well, yeah, of course it did, because you're generating types of motivation and intention that are counter to the experience. The thing that made the experience happen is that you weren't separating, probably you were getting good concentration because you weren't separating the mind from the concentration like this. I'm over here concentrating and the activity is over here. So this is why, if you've ever wondered why, sometimes people ask me about my experience and I say, I prefer to talk about things at a theoretical level. Sometimes I'll share experiences if they're extremely stable and I'm basically not at risk of losing those experiences. But part of the reason meditators don't like talking about this stuff in detail about their best experiences is because if your mind can't generate non-duality with the experience because you've developed a big ego about being the type of person who can have those experiences, then the experience stops happening. So for those of you who are wondering how that dynamic works, this is at least my take on why it works that way. So that's a lot of ground to cover, probably for just a few minutes. But if you have, if the type of mind you're bringing into the practice is more like the result of the practice, then the result happens more quickly and easily. If the mind is less like that, then you have to do a fair amount of practice to get over the type of mind that got you into the practice in order to get to the result of the practice. Does that make sense? So, yeah, this should make sense out of some things for those of you who like the non-dual thing. And where the philosophy can really help is that if you get this sort of stuff, and this is I think a pretty basic element of all of this stuff, if you can get this part really clear in your head, you go, oh, this is why I need to set my motivation and intention really clearly when I'm entering the session, because that's going to determine that has the potential to determine to a great deal how the session is going to go, right? Um, Also, a lot of the stuff you might just consider philosophy is actually about transforming your character. Your character will be a certain way when you attain the results of some of these practices. It'll come out of having attained the results. Likewise, if you generate that kind of character ahead of time, then the results come more easily. And these two feed on each other. So the more that you become like the result, the easier the result comes. And the more you have the result, the easier the transformation of character comes. And these go like this in a virtuous cycle. And this is part of the why things like Lohan Palm, they work really well. If you make the body more like it will be, if your mind was already extremely calm, extremely lucid, able to enter a non-dual state of awareness whenever it wanted, the body will be relaxed. The joints will relax. And instead of being here and all tense, the joints will open and relax all that space, right? So if instead of sitting like this, you learn how to open and relax the joint, well, now your body is no longer a barrier to you entering into that condition mentally. Does this make sense? So the more of you that you have access to now that you can get pointed in the direction of the results, the easier the results come. And as the results come, it reinforces all the other work you're doing with your body, with your character, with your energy system, and they work together. This is the brilliance, I think, of all of the physical yogas you find in Hinduism, to a degree, visualization practices, mantra practices, all of these things, roughly speaking, are meant to try to take more and more and more of you and aim it in the same direction. And there are lots of different ways to do it, and that can be very confusing. But the more that I've thought about it in the way I just described, the less confusing it's all been. Um, and the great traditions, the great Asian slash Eastern slash Indian traditions, etc., they seem to share this ethic in common that the more of you we can get pointed the same direction, the faster everything happens. And then there's debate about what elements are important in doing that and which ones aren't. Like, do you need to eat a certain way or do you not need to eat a certain way? Do you need to sleep a certain way? Do you not need to sleep a certain way? Like, there's all these tools you could add on or not. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I should jump off now and join my teacher in class, but this has been good. This was a pretty good session. I hope it was good for you all, and I'll see you tomorrow with a bit of luck. Hope to see you again very soon. Cheers.